This is Metro Week. Our top story, Civil Discourse. We'll interview the director of the National Institute based in Tucson about its work to change political conversations. Then our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. Tucson's Institute for Civil Discourse was formed in 2011 after the January 8th shooting. Since then, the University of Arizona Institute has launched initiatives to change how lawmakers talk to each other and how voters talk to lawmakers. We'll begin with a review of its work. About a month after the shooting, the Institute was founded with big-name co-chairmen to connect people with diverging viewpoints and foster debate in politics. It surveyed moderate voters and found they dislike when politics and politicians turn mean, personal, or vitriolic. In 2012, 80% of those surveyed said they were ashamed of the way senators and members of Congress deal with big issues. At the time, the national budget deficit and the amount of debt the federal government carried were big issues, as was immigration. Voters characterized themselves as frustrated and worried about political problem solving. After that, the Institute started a program in which two members of the U.S. House from opposite political parties visited each other's districts and held meetings with constituents. The goal was to get them to focus on issues, not party platforms. The Institute also started legislative training programs aimed at getting new lawmakers to talk to the other party more than during election season debates. It holds sessions in which political reporters analyze their role in partisan discourse. They evaluate their own coverage with a focus on how issues affect voters, rather than limiting themselves to horse race coverage. Why does it matter how politicians act? Institute Director Carolyn Lukensmeyer described the 2014 election cycle as the worst ever in terms of negativity. That's a direct quote. She said the fallout is voters trust politicians less. The Institute has also offered grants to help fund research into voters' behavior at town halls and the tone of comments people make on the Arizona Daily Star News website as another measure of civility. The Institute is still offering those state lawmaker training sessions and is trying a personal way to get voters to talk to each other about the big issues that drive their decisions on a ballot. Institute Director Carolyn Lukensmeyer joined me in the studio and explained why civility tends to be worse in national elections than in local races such as city council. Carolyn, tell us about the campaign that the Institute is doing called Text, Talk, Vote and why it's aimed at young people.
Well, one of the things that most Americans actually noticed after the midterm elections is that voter turnout was very low across all age groups. But it really was millennials that turned out in the lowest numbers. And in terms of this period that we're in of big money, one of the things we need to do is have more people vote, because that is one of the ways to keep the of the people, by the people, for the people real.
Keep that voice up.
Exactly. So we created, when we were working on mental health issues after the Newtown slaughter of kids, we created a texting platform that connected young people talking to each other in small groups and then linked it to social media. It was so effective with young people. They liked it so much, and they actually took actions that we thought, why not try this on voting? So in the midterm in 2014, we did this experiment, or pilot you should call it, in New Hampshire. We had a partnership with all of the public universities and community colleges. The N was small, something around 900 young people. We did a pre and a post survey. And before they participated, we ran this for 3 weeks right by the election. Before they participated, 50% of them said they did not intend to vote.
Wow.
In the post survey, 20% of that 50% did vote. That's a huge number in terms of impacting people who didn't intend to vote. So we think we've got something pretty important here. And what we've started to do is create partnerships in other states around the country. You know, state law is so different about elections. We'll probably only focus in those states that have registration on the same day as the election, so that we aren't dealing with both convincing young people to register and convincing them to vote. But we're very excited about doing this. We have partnerships with student groups all over the country, partnership with a national organization called Fair Vote, Project Vote Smart. So we think we can reach literally tens of thousands of young people in 2016.
And it's my understanding that someone would send a text to a phone number that's associated with the Institute. They get a prompt back for a discussion topic?
Yeah, you just take your phone, you type in the number, and then you put start in the message line. And it always starts with a video, and young people themselves create the video, which this then tells you exactly what's going to happen. And we then text some facts. It could be facts about an issue, facts about candidates, and then we give you a discussion question. So you talk about it with 2 or 3 other people so you can influence each other's opinions and thoughts. And then you text us back the answers to the questions, and we can actually then, the computer program that supports this can theme, so we could say all the young people in New Hampshire felt this, this, and this about these candidates. All the young people in Arizona had this concern about this year's election, or whatever it may be.
So are you going to do more of the surveys that you did in the first round so you can see what the results are?
Absolutely.
And how do you do those?
Once you have texted in that you're going to participate in this, the very first thing that you get after the video is just a small set of questions. There's some demographic questions, and then it ends with the intention, do you plan to vote in the 2016 presidential election?
So you might also be able to track how people feel right now in 2015 and also how they feel late in 2016?
We could, but we probably won't actually start the participation until 2016.
Okay.
Young people really don't pay a lot of attention to politics, and we think if the time frame that we're asking them to pay attention is too long, that we'll lose them.
It's too long for a lot of us, actually.
Well, this is without question the case. By far too many television ads for all of us.
Well, I also wanted to ask you about something else you're doing to promote civility and civil discourse in state legislatures. And you've told me that you're giving an award soon. Tell us about that.
Well, we discovered that both Republicans and Democrats in state legislatures were very concerned that super PAC money was beginning to come in, particularly it started in the swing states, Ohio, Iowa, to sort of create the hyper-partisanship that has kept anything from happening in D.C. And these legislators sincerely said, we don't want this to be true in our states. So we created a program called Next Generations. We do a workshop in a state called Building Trust Through Civil Discourse. We've to date worked in 9 states, 235 members, a few more Democrats than Republicans, but pretty well balanced. In August, the National Council of State Legislators is having their annual convention. So the day before that convention, we've invited as many, we can call them alumni from these states as we want. And in fact, 3 members of the Arizona legislature will be there. And we're going to launch a national network for state legislators who are committed to civil governance. And as we've watched what's happened in these states, some states we've worked in twice. A couple of states we've done more than half of the members of the legislature. Wow. So they're actually beginning to work across the aisle to solve problems, not just to have better relationships. And it hit us that this is having such a big impact that each year we'd like to actually give an award to one state, one Republican and one Democrat, who now, they didn't just participate, but they've actually led some legislative battles that really became cross-partisan, that really solved a problem that hadn't been solved. And we will be announcing this August 2nd in Seattle, just a couple days from when this runs. And given that we're in Arizona, I think I can tell you that it's going to be given to Sam Hunt, a Democrat, and to Hans Zeiger, a Republican. And what we are very especially proud of and excited about is that Gabby Giffords and Mark Kelly will be with us to make the award.
And actually the award's named after Gabrielle Giffords.
Yes.
Why is that?
You know, what's been fascinating to us, Andrea, is we've started doing this around the country. I mean, think how long it's been since Gabby was a state legislator. But people in state legislators know that's where she started. She is still an inspiration to people about this. Members of those legislators would talk to us about Gabby. That one of the reasons they wanted to come to it was because we were from the National Institute of Civil Discourse. So as we were meeting with some of them in a facilitator training program here in Tucson about 10 months ago and began to think about this, they said, why don't you name the award after Gabby? So we did.
All right, and the people who are winning the award, do you have a specific project or bill they worked on together?
Actually, there are 3 of them.
Okay.
So here we know lots of issues about water. In the state of Washington, those natural resource issues are much more about spawning rights for salmon, things like that. So one of the bills was a natural resource bill.
Okay, that they worked, like sort of shepherded through together?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Last topic I want to touch on before we go, and that is the Tucson city elections are coming up. We've got a primary at the end of April, which is pretty much a non-primary. There are no primary opponents, so the general election in November. And I was curious to see if you have any research or firsthand observations about the difference in civility in local races, such as city councils or county boards, versus those state legislature or congressional races. How do we act at a local level?
Well, I think this is something that we track, and several foundations that fund our work actually do specifically look at what's happening at the local level, what's happening at the state level, what's happening at the national level. I think most of your listeners will find this very intuitive, that it gets worse the higher up you go. Part of that is the money involved. Part of that is all the kind of television advertising that begins to really do the sort of beating away at each other's characters. That costs a lot of money, and there's a lot less of that in city council races, school board races. Now, clearly there are examples around the country where, because personality conflicts between two people or an issue that's been longstanding in the community, it's not that there are not examples of really incivil local campaigns, but they're very infrequent compared to state and compared to national. I think a lot of Americans, particularly those of us who live in swing states, now feel like there's no such thing as a state or national that isn't uncivil, that isn't about what's wrong with you as a person, or if you don't agree with me, there must be, your values are screwed up. So I really think that what we're seeing is, look at the 2014 election where the voting dropped in all age categories. It's part of how Americans are showing their disgust with what has become the norm, particularly at the state and national level.
Even despite the fact that midterms tend to have lower turnout than the presidential years?
That's certainly part of it, there's no question, but this midterm dropped even lower than is the pattern of midterms. Now, one of the things that I think you and your listeners would find interesting is these state legislators that we're working with, the workshop that we're going to do with them in Seattle, one of the things they've asked for, they've asked us to find state legislators around the country who've made a pledge to run completely positive campaigns. And we're actually going to do a workshop with some members who have won with that strategy. So what's the exciting thing, and I find it's a long process from where we've come to, but what I find really exciting about our state program, people are really knowing that it's wrong and they want to help change it. And the reason we're creating this national network is it means people from Iowa, Ohio, Washington, Virginia, Pennsylvania, they will meet each other in our network. Many of them are going to run for Congress. So our belief, and they already tell us that they're excited about it, is by the time they run for Congress, they will know each other, they will have worked together, and it means coming in as a freshman cohort, so to speak, they'll have a little more unified voice about how they want it to work in Congress.
And you can see your work kind of filter up through the levels of government.
Exactly.
Carolyn Lukensmeyer is Executive Director of the Institute for Civil Discourse. Thanks so much for coming in today.
Andrea, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Next on Arizona Week, the governor allocates more money for border security.
I think Border Patrol can handle the border. I don't need to worry about the border. I need to worry about Pima County.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio this week are Astrid Galvan of the Associated Press, Fernanda Echavarri of Arizona Public Media, and Patrick McNamara of the Arizona Daily Star. Thanks to each of you for coming in today.
Thanks for having us.
Astrid, let's stay a little bit on the topic of civility and just flip to the city election a little bit. There's some billboards around town that have been put up by a political action committee, and they're criticizing the city council members who are up for re-election this year in Tucson. Can you give us some examples of what those billboards say?
Yeah, one, for example, says, "Who let a few radicals hold downtown hostage?" And another one talks about potholes, which is a hot topic in Tucson.
Always is a hot topic in Tucson. And these are all over town. Patrick, Frank Antinori, a former state lawmaker, is heading up the committee that's behind these. What does that tell us about the state of politics in Tucson right now, or about the election?
Well, it certainly shows that Frank Antinori still wants to be relevant in Pima County GOP, at least until he moves to Cochise County, which he says that he's going to. But it also shows, I think, that the Pima County Republican Party thinks that they have a strong slate of candidates this time, and they can maybe claim some of those seats. They haven't had a full slate of candidates for a general election in the city council since 2009. They still don't have someone to run for mayor, but they do have 3 candidates, and they're all running together and doing advertisements and websites together, so they must think that they've got a good chance.
Now, is Frank Antinori working with those Republican candidates?
Not that anyone's seen so far, I don't think. You know, these issues that they're bringing up are long-standing Republican issues, talking points that they've often hit on. So it's not a surprise that they might be adopting that similar rhetoric, but I don't know if there's any direct coordination between the two.
And this is an independent committee. It's not one of the candidates' committees that's putting up the billboards.
That's right.
Okay. Now I want to move on to a topic that you covered in the county this past weekend, and that's a series of issues that you found at Pima Animal Care Center. Why don't you first start with kind of a rundown of what you found in your reporting?
Well, in 2014, Pima County's Risk Management Department had been spending quite a bit of time at Pima Animal Care Center and looking at the safety and health issues out there and seeing how much of the time they were meeting the standards that they've set. And what they found was that there had been an increasing number of work-related injuries, non-fatal type injuries, but the type of things that are reportable. And they wanted to see what was going on. So what they mostly found was a general lack of health and safety practices and policies in place at PAC.
How did you find out about this when you were uncovering this story?
There had been a few previous media reports about some specific incidents or practices. I think one of the issues was animal control officers using expandable batons versus pepper spray when dealing with aggressive animals. And some sources I spoke with said that there had been some concerns among county officials of the health and safety standards there. So I requested the reports that they compiled through risk management to see what exactly was going on.
And can you give us a few examples of maybe some of the specific violations that you saw?
Yeah. One of the big things was the county, they've built this temporary kennel facility out there. It's a large tent, essentially, and it didn't have permanent electrical conduit. So instead of that, there was a whole bunch of extension cords that were dragged into the building, and they were zip tied to the uprights and cross beams and stuff like that. And they weren't waterproofed, so they had plastic bags over them. Another issue was in the tent. Another issue was they have to clean the tent daily, and there wasn't proper drainage. So when they would, physically scoop out the animal waste, and they had to hose the concrete slab off, and the contaminated runoff would pool right next to the parking lot where people would come to, pick up animals. So there was this issue with that. There were a lot of just a lack of health and safety practices, a lack of training of employees, of some of the management there. And that seemed to be the biggest thing, not any glaring incidents, but just not a process in place.
And kind of an overall mode of operations issues as opposed to incidents.
Yeah.
So how much of this does the county, or could you, by reading the reports, attribute to the crowding issues and the lack of space?
Probably added to it, but I think it's pretty clear from the reports that many of these issues were in place, and they did a similar analysis in 2011 and found these things, some of these problems in place. I think that the change in philosophy to be as close to a no-kill type facility as possible has meant there's a huge influx of animals that remain on the premise that they don't euthanize, and because of that, the issues were maybe amplified or became more clear because of just the need for workers there. They have a lot of volunteers working, and they have inmate labor.
Which can they be training, questions of how well everybody's trained
Exactly.
if they're in
So
and out.
that it became clear that there weren't processes in place because of the additional need that is reality at Pima Animal Care Center.
I want to switch to another story this week, Fernanda. We aired a story on our radio station about some civilians who are doing some activity on the border. I don't know exactly which words to call it. They're not necessarily trying to do law enforcement, but they're kind of surveilling the border a little bit. You went to speak with one of those groups near the border. Can you tell us about them?
Yes, recently I went in collaboration with a producer from an NPR show called Latino USA. He and I went out to meet with a group. They're called Arizona Border Recon. And although we haven't quite heard that much about sort of the civilian militia groups or anti-illegal immigration groups being as organized as some of these groups, they haven't gone anywhere. You know, since the Minutemen, some of these groups are still out in the border. So we wanted to see who they were and what they did. And I came across, this camp was set up in a very remote area. It took us a very long time to find them, actually, near Ervaca by the Buenos Aires Wildlife Refuge. And we actually happened to stop by on a night when they were just camping out and they weren't in an operation, as they call it. But what normally happens is one or two men will take a sleeping bag, some food, maybe water. They are armed, so they take weapons, and they go set up in remote areas of the desert that are known for being trails of smuggling, whether it be people or drugs. They say their focus is not on people, it's really on drugs, although it started, this group started 5 years ago to try to stop illegal immigration. After the man who started it, Tim Foley, after a year, he realized that really what he had a bigger issue with and what the bigger problem was drugs, not so much people. However, the two kind of go hand in hand these days. But so they set up camp, or they set up a little area where one or two will hang out for days. And spot, they have night vision stuff, they have GPS, they have radios where they talk to each other. If they spot a group carrying drugs, they sort of get back to their communications guy, and then that communications guy apparently calls Border Patrol. I asked,
the person is not with them, he's remote, he or she?
Yes, he has a truck set up with a lot of equipment that, because a lot of the times they can't call Border Patrol, the members of the group, from where they are because it's such a remote area. So they use the radios to communicate with their sort of communications guy, and then he makes the phone call to Border Patrol. They are armed, however, Tim Foley, the man who sort of is the leader of the group, said that in 5 years he hasn't had to use his weapon once to when coming across groups of people. He does use it to threaten them to stop. He told us at times he pulls out his gun, points it at the group and says, drop your weapons, drop the drugs, and then holds them there until Border Patrol arrives.
What's Border Patrol's response to groups like these on the border?
Border Patrol, I spoke with Peter Bittigan. He's a spokesman for the Border Patrol in the Tucson area. And he said that they're not really treated any differently than any other group. I have to remind people also that they're set up in public land. So they have permits to carry their weapons, and they're set up in public land. So there's nothing technically illegal about what they're doing. Border Patrol has said that the agency does not encourage anybody to sort of take it upon themselves to patrol the border. It's very dangerous. Those are the words that Border Patrol used. I believe it was extremely dangerous to be encountering people like this at the border when you're either alone or not trained. This is what the spokesman said. So they don't actively communicate with them. Whatever tips or whatever phone calls come in from groups like the Arizona Border Recon, the Border Patrol agent I spoke with said they're treated as if you or I were driving down the road in Ervaca, saw something, and called Border Patrol.
No different than a homeowner or a rancher or a driver.
Right.
Okay. Astrid, also want to talk about a story that you've been covering, which is the I-10 bridge collapse near the California-Arizona state line. First of all, what's the status of the road?
It is back up, and for the most part, and people are kind of back at their regular route.
Okay. What was the impact of the closure on area businesses?
Huge. It's kind of twofold. The towns that are along that road suffered because they saw a huge decrease in traffic. But towns around the routes around the bridge saw a huge increase in commerce. Towns like Parker, Arizona, and Yuma, and their visitors bureaus and other organizations that work to kind of bring people in took advantage of this and started, using social media to tell people, hey, look, we have stuff to do here. We know you have to drive through. Like, check this out. Parker did this Park, Arizona, which is right north of I-10 near the California border, did this postcard, whether it was like best detour ever, Parker, Arizona. It was really interesting to see how they kind of jumped on the wagon right away and try to get people to stop by.
And you also saw efforts by the Yuma Chamber of Commerce, and they were saying this was pretty significant to them. Why was it significant in Yuma to have this extra traffic?
Because Yuma in the summer is really, really slow. It really relies on winter visitors, and they're gone obviously by the summer, and so there's just not a lot going on other than people who are driving through to San Diego. And so a lot of people who normally wouldn't pass through I-8 were going there.
Or they're only spending money on gas when they pass through. They're not stopping.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And they had one lady who decided to spend the night to check out the city because she just thought it was interesting. She never thought she'd be there again.
Dateland and all those other attractions you can see when you drive to San Diego.
Right.
Getting more traffic. All right, so on to another development issue, Patrick. In downtown Tucson, the city is looking at developing the Ronstadt Transit Center, changing how that works, potentially building vertically on top of it, and is seeking proposals from developers to do that. Those were aired publicly in the last few weeks. What are those two proposals? Can you run down those for us?
Well, both of them are essentially mixed-use developments. The transit element would be maintained for both of the proposals, but it would be a mix of residential, office, retail, and one of them I think has sort of like more public space, small park type thing, and I think a rooftop garden, a community garden sort of thing. But basically we're talking mixed-use development.
What was the reaction to the public airing of those proposals?
I think it was overwhelmingly pretty positive. I think most people recognize there's a value of developing a property like that in the heart of the urban core, and it's still maintaining the function that the property has now, so it didn't seem to be too much negative.
You mentioned it's in the heart of the urban core, and actually all around the Ronstadt Transit Center, we do see a lot of new development, new businesses, new entertainment, restaurants, apartments, things like that. Why has this site been kind of on the back end of development in that area?
Well, it's been reserved for this transit stop since the 1990s, or early 1990s, really. But I think the city has wanted to be cautious when planning to redevelop it. There's a constituency that wants it to be as much of the transit element as possible, but I think the city wanted just to involve as many people with an interest as they could before they went forward on a proposal like this.
And what's the city's goal in this development?
Well, I think that they recognize there's a need for more retail space downtown. It's almost completely tapped out with retail, and there's additional amenities to bring to the community. There's also the fact that the streetcar runs just past that, and they need to have as much development and high density as they can on that streetcar line for it to be a success.
I know I asked about reaction generally, but specifically the Tucson Bus Riders Union. What are they saying about the proposals?
I spoke with Brian Flagg about it, and he said that they didn't want to see downtown gentrified, but when I talked with him a little bit more about it, he said, if the transit element is maintained, then maybe it was a win-win. But then afterwards, he did comment on their blog and website for the Casa Maria Soup Kitchen that he thought I took his comments out of context, which I dispute that, but that's what he said.
Okay. And Fernanda, in our last minute or so, I just want to touch on some immigration numbers that you also covered this week. Specifically, a Pew report that showed Mexicans immigrating to Arizona, the numbers are down this year. So by how much?
To the U.S.,
okay.
Not just to Arizona. So
Thank
the
you.
numbers are down, and they're down significantly. If you looked at the year 2000, Pew Research reported 1.6 million Mexican immigrants apprehended at the border, and by 2014, that's 229,000. What the report basically concluded is that the drop in apprehensions doesn't just mean a drop in apprehensions, it also is directly related to a drop in migration. So across the country, the U.S. has seen an increase in migration from Central America as opposed to Mexico. However, in the Tucson sector, although there is a 30% decrease in Mexican migration and in apprehensions from Mexican immigrants, there's still the bigger group of people apprehended at the border in southern Arizona.
Thanks to all of you for coming in today. And as usual, all the stories we produce at Arizona Public Media are available on our website. Now, Metro Week will air at a new time beginning next Friday. We'll be on at 6:30 p.m. Our Sunday rebroadcast will remain at 10:30 a.m. And next, Arizona Week covers state funding for counties along the U.S.-Mexico border.